Us now, Congressman from the 3rd District of Virginia, Bobby Scott. Congressman, great to have you.
Good morning, John. How are you?
You know, now, every time you come on, I always say, you and I agree on more than meets the eye. I tell my audience that all the time. Patriot Act, we were opposed to that. Patriot Act 2, we were opposed to that. Tax cuts in the middle of a war made no sense. We were opposed to that. By the way, on those 3, we were both right. War in Iraq, we were opposed to that. That's 4. Where right now you get the endorsement of one of the most conservative editorial papers in the country, the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Are you becoming a Republican?
No, you're coming a Democrat. Now, you know what? A lot of things that I think more people would agree on if we would agree in our debate to recognize facts, logic, research, arithmetic. I mean, you talk about a budget. If we would agree that arithmetic counts, I think you would have a lot more agreement than we have. But a lot of people do not focus on arithmetic. They come up with budgets that don't even add up, and then you compare one budget that doesn't add up to another budget that doesn't add up, and you know you've got a disagreement. But I think if you would agree to begin with that arithmetic counts and facts and research and logic and precedents. So, you know, what did you do last time there was a similar situation? We would have a lot more agreement than we have.
Well, I think you're right. We also agree on our recidivism rates are out of control, the whole justice system, the number of people. Do you know, Congressman, that we continue to have this is a mind-boggling stat, and I know we got to get into politics and all this stuff, but do you know that we continue to have, by a huge margin, the highest number of people in prison, not only percentage-wise, but just raw numbers of any country, not only in the free world, but including China and Cuba. Now, does that make any sense?
Well, the incarceration rate in most countries is about 50 to 200 per 100,000 population in jail or prison today, about 50 to 200. Russia is in second place with about 500 and some per 100,000. We're number one in the world at 700 and some per 100,000. In some states and minority community, it's even a lot higher than that. It makes no sense. In fact, the Pew Center on States research has calculated that anything over 500 per 100,000 is actually counterproductive. You've got all the people that need to be locked up in jail, plus you're unnecessarily messing up families. You got too many people with felony records, can't find jobs. Mm-hmm. You're wasting so much money that you're actually adding to crime rather than deducting from crime, anything over 500. We're at 700 and some per 100,000 already. It makes no sense. And if you put some of that wasted money into prevention and early intervention, early childhood education and after-school programs, and get young people out of what the Children's Defense Fund calls the cradle-to-prison pipeline and create a cradle-to-college and career pipeline with some of that money, you would reduce crime and save money in the process, and everybody knows it.
It just doesn't make any sense, and that part of this is because we have so many prisons today that are private enterprise or part of these PP3, whatever they are, that I hate all of them, and so we've almost got this prison industrial complex where the prison companies get paid by the bed, and so they want to keep the prison full. And I'm not spinning a conspiracy theory, but this is reality. I mean, millions and millions of dollars are being made by imprisoning people. I just don't see how that makes any sense.
Well, a lot of people have a financial interest in people going to jail, but most of it, I've been a legislator for a long time. Most of it is just simple-minded politicians codifying slogans and sound bites that sound like you're doing something about crime, like 3 strikes and you're out. And what sense does it make to keep somebody in jail, 80 years old, can't even get up and down the cell block without their walker, spending all that money locking them up? What does that do about juvenile crime in the street?
It's nonsense.
You get all these mandatory minimum sentences where some drug dealer's girlfriend gets 25 years in prison. What is the rational basis for that?
None.
You get little slogans like, if you do the adult crime, you do the adult time. That's been studied, and trying more juveniles as adults actually increases the crime rate because young people going into the system, you lock them up with adult murderers, robbers, drug dealers, and guess what happens when they get out? They're more likely to commit a crime. Everybody knows that, and everybody also knows that the polls, political polls, react. People like the soundbite and think you're doing something about crime, and people come up with this slogan, run on it. I remember in 1994 when we were doing the crime bill, 3 strikes and you're out was the best vote-getting slogan you could come up with. 3 strikes and you're out. It beat anything you could say about Social Security, health care, the environment, Social Security. 3 strikes and you're out. And like I said, it does nothing to reduce crime, but it's extremely expensive when you get somebody, a young person, you lock them up for 50 years when you could have locked them up for 10 years and had as much crime-reducing value than holding somebody from the time they're 50 to the time they died, 80 years old.
Look, the whole thing. The whole thing is ridiculous. Even you take a thing like a former delegate, Phil Hamilton, getting 9.5 years, basically. I mean, it's just insane.
If you look at the Judiciary Committee, mandatory minimums is the fact that you get a mandatory minimum for a lot of drug crimes is one of the major culprits in running up the incarceration rate. Mm-hmm. And they've been studied. Everybody knows that the existence of mandatory minimums wastes money.
Right.
It requires judges to frequently impose sentences that simply violate common sense.
Right.
And there is, and yet you can't get people. You said, let's get rid of some mandatory minimums. You can't. They don't want to do it, and because they took a poll, people like the little soundbite. And
nobody wants to be tabbed as being soft on crime, where you're actually being compassionate, and it's the right thing to do for society because it simply doesn't make any sense. And then they go to jail, they go to prison, and it's basically learn how to be a gang member. College, then they come out, and then they get the recidivism is so high because they get right back in. The whole thing doesn't make any sense.
And when you start looking at the research, for example, if you're in prison and you get a college education while you're in prison, you're less likely to come back. We cut out college financing for college while they're in prison.
It really doesn't.
We cut that out.
It just doesn't make any sense.
So what we need to do is to make sure that when people support things like mandatory minimums, you have to criticize that. I mean, you got people. I've got legislation to reduce mandatory minimums. I'm trying to get it passed. One of the co-sponsors in the Senate is Rand Paul. He's been trying to get rid of mandatory minimums. So I mean, there's bipartisan support to get rid of mandatory minimums. But there's also bipartisan support to keep them.
Well,
so if you could remind people, and mandatory minimums are bad, and then every time somebody votes for a mandatory minimum or a bill with a mandatory minimum in it, criticize them. I'll send you the information, and so that people will know that there's some political downside. Well, part of the problem is you can vote as stupid as you want on crime, and nobody will criticize you. And if you vote smart on crime, you get calls. Why'd you vote against trying more juveniles as adults? And I'll say, well, because all the research shows that it increases the crime rate. Oh, okay. But nobody, those that voted for it never get called. Why'd you vote to increase the crime rate? Nobody gets a call like that.
Well,
and so you keep voting for these slogans and sound bites because there's no downside, and a lot of people get fooled into thinking that you're doing something about crime.
Well, there's a lot of sound bites out there, kind of like ease the squeeze, that are going nowhere. Congressman, I got 3 issues. We got 8 minutes. I want to start with your colleague and your friend, Congressman Randy Forbes, 4th District, right down the road, says he's going to run for chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. What say you?
Well, the Republicans will elect their lead on their committee, and the Democrats will elect ours. So I don't have anything to do with it, but I don't think he would have done it unless he had been encouraged by many of his colleagues. So the fact that he announced to me tells me he's checked with some people and has has a good shot at it. It's going to be tough because he's not the senior. He's not the next in line.
Right.
And seniority counts. But I don't think he would have said that unless he had a reasonable shot at it. He's the senior member, whether he gets it or not. He'll be a senior member on the Armed Services Committee. And the Hampton Roads depends to a large extent on funding from Department of Defense with the military bases, the shipbuilding, as well as the Air Force and Army, Navy bases around the area.
Well, maybe even though you're on the other side of the aisle and you've got to vote for your own minority chair for that, maybe if you hear a little scuttlebutt in the congressional hallways, as they say, you'll be able to feed him a little intel there on the slide.
Well, the Virginia delegation works very well together, so we look out for each other, and I've seen some other delegations that don't work well together, and we do. It makes a difference for Virginia, when the delegation works together.
Get to the new Christopher Newport University poll just out today, Wasson Center. I am a believer in the CNU polling methodology. I think more often than not they're on target. That's why we promote them. Their poll just out 5 days basically before the midterms. Senator Warner 51%, Ed Gillespie 44%, 3% undecided, Sarvis with a couple of percent. So Warner is over 50%, and Ed Gillespie is so far still under the percentage that E.W. Jackson got in 2013. How do you read that, and how do you see this Virginia Senate election playing out?
Well, I think you pointed at the important number, and that's the 51, which shows him ahead. There are a lot of things that I think are important. You did point out that Bishop Jackson, who was considered a very long shot candidate, got 45% of the vote,
and he had no money.
With no money, so you kind of look at that as a base. So I've always looked at the race as a lot closer than the poll started out. Of course, Mark Warner, with having been governor and having been elected as senator, had a lot more name recognition than Mr. Gillespie, who's never run. I'd always expected to be a single-digit race, and that's apparently what it has become. It's going to be hard to predict because it's also an off-year election,
right,
where you can't judge the turnout. I mean, you can have a nice little lead, but if people don't come out if your side doesn't come out to vote and the other side does, you can be embarrassed. I think the polls showed Eric Cantor with a 30-point lead.
Right.
But that side didn't come out. The other side did, and with a 30-point lead, he lost, and it wasn't even close.
That's right.
So I think it's important that people come out to vote, and if we have a real good turnout, I think the number is 51-44. Maybe Mr. Gillespie gets a little more because of the undecided. Warner's. I think Warner's number 51 is the important number. So I think he's going to be over. I think he's going to win. But if people don't turn out, it could be a lot closer than people would like it to be.
I think it's going to be 52-46. That's what I predict. 754. Congressman, I got to get to,
I think about 6 or 7 points is a good guess.
Yeah, that's about where
that'd be mine too.
That's about where I am. And as you know, Congressman, I'm never wrong on this stuff. You know that, right? Let's get to.
then I better agree with you.
I'm always right. Let's get to this race baiting. I mean, you got the Democratic Party of Maryland and North Carolina. Congressman distributing flyers with pictures of a lynching on them, pictures of somebody holding up a sign from the 1960s and at some event that said, African Americans go back to Africa. I mean, this stuff is Ferguson. This stuff is just blatant race baiting. I mean, why can't you guys get together and just stop this stuff?
Well, I don't. You didn't mention anything in Virginia.
No.
I have. I've told friends of mine that I endorse that I'm not going to do any, when you do radio ads for people, I'm not going to do any negative. I'm not going to do racial appeals. I think we can appeal to everybody. You don't have to appeal just to one group. I wouldn't have condoned appeal just to African Americans. I think if you appeal, you can appeal to African Americans, but it ought to be appealed that everybody ought to be. It ought to be aimed at everybody. Mm-hmm. And so when you have an ad, you ought to talk about the importance of Social Security, the importance of health care, the importance of education, the importance of balancing the budget in a fiscally responsible way, using arithmetic, and that's a real problem around here. Everybody wants to get rid of the sequester, $1.2 trillion, and then you ask them how you're going to do it, and you don't hear any numbers. Mm-hmm. You hear already, can we all get along, or we have a commission, or do that? And then you come up with some numbers. You can either, and then they say, well, I'm not going to raise any taxes. That's fine. What are you going to cut? Mm-hmm. And you listen very carefully. You don't even get $0.1 trillion worth of cuts come out of their mouth, and you're trying to get to $1.2 trillion. I mean, this is arithmetic. It's a combination. If you're going to get rid of the sequester and get towards a balanced budget, you need to come up with $1.2 trillion plus additional deficit reduction, and so that doesn't have anything to do with race. That has a lot to do with arithmetic, and I think it would be a lot better off if people made the appeals to people's reason and logic rather than emotion.
That's going to be the final word. We're out of time. We want to thank Congressman Bobby Scott for being with us. By the way, Bobby Scott got the endorsement of the Richmond Times-Dispatch. I just have to keep saying that because times have changed.
Well, I've been running for 22 years. It's the first time.
I know. That's why I keep mentioning it. The most conservative paper in the United States endorses Bobby Scott. See, that's why you're more conservative. I'm telling you, that meets the eye. It's all right to it. We're out of time.
It's arithmetic.
We got to go. Thank you, Congressman Scott.